I'm Ed Donahue, I'm the president of the association. I do what Eileen Hastings tells me to do, and Eileen says get the program going. And we are very, very excited about the panel, but before we get to the panel, we are more excited about our lunch speaker who has arrived. He made it down I-95, which is no easy feat. And what I would like to do is ask Jonathan Adelstein, who's the president of the PCIA, to come up and introduce our lunch speaker. Jonathan joined PCIA as president in 2012, right prior to this show. And he is very graciously, and we're very grateful for him, for procuring for us a lunchtime speaker. I think you're going to be very excited to hear his remarks. But let me let Jonathan do these.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, we have a fantastic lunch speaker today, Anish Chopra. I met him first when he was the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. He's the first one ever, not just of some companies, I mean, this is of the United States. And he's from right here in Virginia. And he has a long history of leadership in the state of Virginia. He served as the Virginia Secretary of Technology under Governor Tim Kaine. And that's when he came to the attention of then President-elect Obama, who was impressed with what he had done here in Virginia. And so I was thrilled to get to work with him. When I was the administrator of the Rural Utility Service, I had about $3.5 billion to give away. Needless to say, I was a little bit more popular then than I am now. But Anish's guidance was essential in that process. He oversaw not just the broadband stimulus, but all of the different technology initiatives in the United States. And he in particular, designed a national wireless initiative that executed an open innovation strategy across different agencies and built on private sector collaboration. Nobody was better at public-private partnerships. Every time we meet with Anish, he always had 10 good ideas that our little agency could only probably pull off one or two because he was a font of creativity, ideas, innovation, ideas about what could be done better, how we could change things, how we could get more competition out there. He always had ideas about sponsoring prizes or getting crowdsourcing going, so he successfully was able to make huge differences in terms of transforming open data for healthcare and energy and education markets, convening tech leaders to develop consensus standards. I could go on and on. Anish is truly remarkable, and what we're so fortunate about today, I'm going to set a high bar because I know he's going to exceed it, is whenever we hear from him, he always gives us new ideas. And they're ideas that we then have to go and do some work for, because we have to figure out, okay, how are we going to implement that? That's a great idea. But we have, I think in this room today, such a powerful group of leaders here in the state of Virginia, that when we get this kind of intellectual firepower from Anish, we're going to be able to take whatever creativity he's going to bring to us. I know there's something good, and run with it. And so we'll have a chance to hear from him, and then have some Q&A and discussion and collaboration to plan how we're going to make Virginia work. What I learned from him also as head of RUS was how much he cares about rural America. It's not just about Northern Virginia or the more populated parts of the states or the United States, but he always had a special affinity, I think, and would pull me aside after every meeting with all of the big shots, and he'd say, well, what are we going to do about this rural issue or that rural issue, and how can we make more progress in making sure that every part of this country has access to broadband that's second to none. Never forgot about rural Virginia when he did so much as Secretary of Technology here. I could go on and on. I'm not going to because I'd rather have us hear from Anish Chopra. Thanks for being with us, Anish.
All right. All right. Well, Jonathan is a great friend, and it's nice to see so many of you. Some of you have been part of the wireless and the broadband initiatives that we had going back in the Kaine years. And so I'm excited to reacquaint myself with many of you. And more importantly, I think this is an opportunity for the next 5 years for Virginia to show the rest of the country and the rest of the world what the next chapter of economic growth on wireless will look like. And, you know, it's going to be a little bit different than what we are normally accustomed to. And I'll be sharing a bit about where I think the differences are. Differences and change can be good, or they can be angst-inducing. So I'll do my best to try to explain a bit about the trends and the opportunities. But one personal observation about rural, I don't know, how many of you serve our rural markets in Virginia? Oh, good. That's at least half the room. A colleague of mine at the White House, or one of our advisors that we brought in, made the following comment about the next chapter of economic growth in wireless broadband. That rural America is the Saudi Arabia of spectrum. Just think about that for a minute. You're in New York City, every lane of Spectrum is congested. And we still have the congested lane models in the way we propagate wireless communications around the Commonwealth and country. But as we move to a sharing model, where we open up the highway lanes, if you will, there's large swaths of airwaves in our rural communities that are now open and available for data traffic. And so if we're going to invent a new economy built on widening access to information and building valuable products and services on top of that accessible information, why can't we invent it first in rural and then export elsewhere? In reverse of what we've done historically, which is invented urban and then subsidize our way to rural. I think we can do it in reverse. And I'm hopeful that by today's discussion, we might have a couple of you thinking about ways to do just that. Brian and Tad. So what I'd like to do is, if I have the system set up to the right way, I want to give you a little bit of slide deck and background. Are we anywhere near the, we'll get that going in a minute. When I get the first slide up, I want to take you halfway around the world to India, which is where my family's from. And it made my folks very proud when Dad got excited about this. You can see the first slide. I guess if I have the same ability to move, or if you could be so kind as to help me move to the next slide. Of all the things I did at the White House, it was kind of, Air Force One. I get to travel around with the president. It's exciting. My parents loved it. But me going to India with the president was the thing that made them most excited. And what I wanted to show for the president, this is not connected, so if you just go to the next slide, that'd be great. What I wanted to show you was what happened in 90 days to transform a village that had no indoor plumbing, no paved roads, no what you would think of as any kind of infrastructure worth talking about. But 90 days to the story I'll share with you, this village was given a fiber connection to the village hut in the center and a 4G WiMAX tower on the roof so that the villagers would have access to 4G mobile broadband. This is a town in rural Rajasthan, and you can see in the foreground the villagers that were using this infrastructure to communicate directly with President Obama on his trip to India. Now, the president couldn't go to rural India. His constraints were to visit the urban centers, but using basically a two-way high-definition network connection, he was able to communicate with these folks and hear their stories firsthand. A farmer who had no ability to prove he owned his own land and therefore couldn't get loans because he didn't have a title on his property, so the banks wouldn't lend him to invest in his crops. Now, thanks to this accessible service, he was able to walk into that village center and essentially have a window into the federal government records. He could print his own certified copy of his land records, and without much corruption or friction generally, he could earn that loan. He said to the president, this has changed my life in less than 90 days. A young man who was studying an MBA, but had to cut off his studies to go care for a grandmother who was in the village and ill. And rather than delay his studies, he was able to stay in this village and finish his MBA, or to continue taking classes. And a nurse who now, when arriving to the village, had essentially real-time information about which kids in the village did or did not have their immunizations. All of this happened in 90 days. Now, the government of India, what they shared with the president on that trip, is they're going to provide fiber and 4G connectivity to each of their 600,000 villages over the next 5 years. The president's response: "You will leapfrog." This is the quote. "One of the incredible benefits of technology is that it can position one to leapfrog some of the intermediate stages of government service delivery, avoiding some of the 20th century mechanisms for delivering services and going straight to the 21st. This is happening all around the world. We've been talking about broadband connectivity to rural Virginia since the first minute I walked into the governor's cabinet in 2006. In that same time period, they're going to connect 600,000 villages. Adelstein, where are we going to be in Virginia? We have a bit of work to do. Now, the point I'm getting at is that this is happening in the context of a global race to economic growth and empowerment. If I get to the next slide. The President has presented a strategy that we are going to continue operating under for translating this into the United States. How do we make this same response, if you will, to a global competitive movement? How do we do so in a way that will empower and connect all corners of the country to economic growth? Well, we're going to do three things. The country's going to invest in the building blocks of innovation, which traditionally was roads, railways, and highways, and runways, but now will increasingly include mobile broadband, human capital investments, and research and development. We're going to set rules of the road that will promote fair and open competition. And we're going to open up the government and connect to people in every corner of the country so that their talents can be applied to solve some of the biggest challenges of our day. What I'd like to now do is walk you through these three principles with a few examples so that you have a sense for where I think the country's heading, where I'm confident the Commonwealth is heading, and the role you can play in writing this very important chapter of our story. Next slide. Let me get into wireless for a minute. The President's National Wireless Initiative. Raise your hand. Tell me if you've heard of this, if you know about it. This is, you might think of this as the Spectrum program, a couple of you. Yeah. Maybe it's that one. Yeah, but you're cool if you want to fix it. Thank you. Here's what the policy does. Now, this is, let me just do a window in Washington. We think Washington is broken, generally. People don't get along. Oh, sad. Can I come back? We think Washington is working. Not working, but I want to share with you how it can work. The President convened CEOs from all over the major corporations in America in December of 2010. In preparation for the State of the Union, he had asked for ideas to ensure that America can remain competitive in the future. And he'd heard pretty emphatically that we as a country need to improve our infrastructure, especially in the digital economy. The President dispatched me to come back with a proposal for the State of the Union, which we've been working on all along, but now we had an entree to get in, which would to write the next chapter of wireless communications and position us for that growth. The President's State of the Union introduced the National Wireless Initiative in January of 2011. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison and Jay Rockefeller said, we're going to write a bipartisan bill in the Senate. We formed a group. We tackled every complicated issue. It was very difficult, addressing incentive auction authority and opening up access to some of the spectrum that would not be auctioned off, and a whole range of issues. A bipartisan bill then was taken to the Senate Commerce Committee, and a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans voted it out. And then Congress kept it in its back pocket until the payroll deal that had to be struck at the end of 2011. If you recall, the Congress was going to extend payroll tax benefits, and they needed an opportunity to bring new services forward. So we incorporated the Bipartisan National Wireless Initiative into that piece of legislation. I think we're getting close. Okay, we're there. So the bill gets signed into law a year and 1 month from when the President introduced the concept. And it's done some pretty exciting things that I believe will give us an opportunity for leadership in both the Commonwealth and the country. I want to highlight 4. Obviously, are any of you talking to the broadcasters, or any of you know what the strategy is? They're going to be deciding which of their UHF channels they're going to want to put up for auction. It is our estimate that we'll have at least 100 megahertz of spectrum that we made available, and Congress priced out what they thought that would generate in terms of revenue to the Treasury. We took $7 billion of those proceeds to do what was asked of us following the tragedy on 9/11, and to provide cops and firefighters and EMS professionals access to 4G mobile broadband in every corner of the country. Question number 1 for you to ponder. What will the tower companies do to ensure that the $7 billion that will be distributed across the country will pay for infrastructure that can both serve public safety's needs and commercial needs? How many of you remember the broadband toolkit we created before we left the Kane administration? This is Governor Warner and I. Of course, Brian was on it, Tad was on it, many of you were on it. You might want to check it out. I think it's wired.virginia.gov, and it's probably still there. The premise was public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships. And if you recall, it was a Republican delegate, Joe May, who partnered with Governor Kane to authorize public-private partnerships for mobile broadband, rural broadband in Virginia. We have all the authority in the world. In fact, Brian did our first transaction. It was probably more complicated than it needed to be, but at least it was the guinea pig, close to the guinea pig. Tad's probably done half a dozen at this point. To say the following: if the government will produce a public safety tower, it need not only be for public safety, that the assets could be deployed for commercial use as well. And that if we are thoughtful about the $7 million, we could essentially both save and expand access at the same time. I'm assuming you've all thought about this, so I don't have to go much more in the weeds, but the first question I would ask is, where will the $7 billion go? And how might we choose locations that can duly serve public safety and our commercial use? I'd start with replicating what Brian David's done, which is map out all the assets in your region and welcome the tower companies to come in and dialogue with public safety to figure out, well before all the money trickles down. It's going to take a long time for the sort of bureaucrats to figure it all out. You shouldn't wait. How many of you are having conversations right now with public safety about tower locations? Excellent. I would find ways to be very creative on ensuring that that information can be, that asset can be duly purchased. Next. $100 million has been included in the package for wireless research and development, for network and spectrum sharing to help public safety. Now here is, I think, the golden opportunity. By my recollection, a, quote, rural tower is unprofitable to a carrier pretty much all the time. If I did the math aggregate, I believe during the hearings, 40% of all tower locations are unprofitable to the carrier, if you calculate revenue as a proxy for adjusted used minutes. So if I calculated an imputed revenue value for the tower, cost to run the tower, fixed and variable, and the revenue based on minutes used, about 40% of a carrier's towers, now this is my memory, you all may shoot at me and say I'm wrong and no, they're all profitable, but I'm going by my memory. But we're not going to be that far off. So the first question for the research and development community is, how might we share? I held 3 forums while at the White House with public safety and carriers and tower companies, asking the question, has the American wireless industry maximized the value of sharing? And the answer to that is no. We haven't even started. We lip service the idea of sharing, but if you go to Europe and Asia, one wireless infrastructure, not just the physical tower, but like literally the base station and a few other electronics, are shared. Any of you from Sprint? Or in the Sprint family? Sprint's rolling out Network Vision. Network Vision is sharing. It's sharing Clearwire, it's sharing the old IDAN network, it's sharing legacy Sprint network, and they had cut a deal with LightSquared to carry the LightSquared. It was before independently run networks on one electronics base. You all know this? That would cut 30 to 40% off the cost of maintaining or operating system. You all know these economics, okay? I believe with further research and development, we can go even further. There are now even more sophisticated abilities to basically turn everything that's hardware into software. That's maybe the simplest way of thinking about it. Cloud-based radio access networks, a whole range of technologies that we can deploy. I would like Virginia to be the first state in the country to maximize the value of sharing. Because we have the legal authority to do public-private partnerships, we know a certain portion of the $7 billion is coming anyway. Why wait? Let's do it now. Maybe we'll start in the Lynchburg area with Ryan. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us. And by the way, if we do this, the new software and products and services associated with a sharing environment could then be exported to other markets around the country, and may even be exports around the world. Fourth, there is a proposal around unlicensed use. In the law, we've put forward new models of unlicensed use of spectrum. Super Wi-Fi, I think, is the kind of tag word, buzzword. And the question could be raised, what is the appropriate way to incorporate unlicensed and licensed in making sure that we're maximizing access to ubiquitous, data-rich broadband applications in every corner of the Commonwealth? This is the National Wireless Initiative that is signed into law that we can take action on right away. What would we want to do with this infrastructure? A few slides, and then I'd love to take your questions and engage in a bit of a dialogue. Well, the first thing I think we need to do is close the educational achievement gap. It is absolutely unacceptable in a global race for economic growth where the rest of the world understood the American formula: educate the workforce and the jobs and industries of the future will come sooner. Well, I want you to see this chart. I served on the Council on Virginia's Future when I was in the governor's cabinet. They published this chart in 2010. This chart, you can't read it. I'll tell you what it says. It says that Virginia is moving in the wrong direction on educational attainment. For those aged 25 to 34 in Virginia, we have produced fewer graduates than those 45 to 54. In fact, 3% fewer graduates. Every other country in the world that has figured out education is the key to success is doing far better. Korea, up 176%. Canada, up 27%. Japan, up 38%. Ireland, up 76%. Virginia, down 3%. Now, I bring this up not because all is lost. It's not. We're figuring this out now. We got to close the gap. Well, one of the ways you close the gap is access to mobile broadband for every kid. I visited a school in California where in the 5th grade, they've moved to what's called a 24/7 learning model. The teacher spends about 10 minutes in the classroom talking about the concept in math, and then the kids, at their pace, learn the substance. And they use the Khan Academy videos, which you may have read about in the 60 Minutes, and they can proceed at their pace. And the teacher manages where the kids are. It's basically personalized learning. This class, the first class that turned on this service, I met a 5th grader that has finished calculus. That 5th grader isn't a genius child prodigy son of some Nobel Prize winner. The kid spends 3 hours a night on math videos. May not be the healthiest thing in the world. I kind of like it. I had to do math homework when I was a kid. I wasn't allowed to get out of my house until I finished a bunch of math assignments. But the point is, with 24/7 learning, when you, quote, check out of school, you can take all of your school data with you, take it to your mobile device, take courses and videos and games and other online material, can finish and expand upon what you've learned, demonstrate mastery, and then come back when you check into school the next morning and plug right back in so the teacher knows what you did in the off hours and can be smarter about what you've done. The teacher that I met, she said, I have become a master conductor. I know exactly where each of my kids are. I know exactly what their challenges are. Because mobile broadband allowed them to continue the classroom experience after the day was done. After the day was done. Healthcare. Well, very controversial issue, I assume. Some of you have opinions, probably for or against where we are in healthcare. But as we move to a new healthcare economy, how we connect to the healthcare system, again, will rely on mobile broadband. What do I mean by this? Well, let me share with you what this story is, and I'll give you the analogy. When the Affordable Care Act was signed into law, the very first deliverable was due in 90 days. A website to be called healthcare.gov, which would have the comprehensive database of every public and private insurance option available to us right now. If any of you lack health insurance and need to buy an individual policy, you can visit healthcare.gov and it'll look like Expedia to find the insurance options that are right for you. But we learned something in developing healthcare.gov. We didn't really want people coming to healthcare.gov because who's going to remember healthcare.gov? We figured if we opened up access to the data, people would find the information from wherever they are. Whether they knew it was from the government or not is a different issue. You all know U.S. News and World Report? U.S. News and World Report has launched an insurance finder. The entire website is powered by healthcare.gov. It doesn't say it. It's got a nice picture of a family, and it's U.S. News, and it's all this great stuff. But they've taken all the data from the government, and they've brought it out to people where they visit, which people read U.S. News and World Report. One of the first startups I was proud to have met when I was in the White House was a company called iTriage. It's got 6 million downloads on the iPhone App Store. iTriage, and it's an ER doctor who said people go to the ER, they don't need to go to the ER. So he created a set of questions that you could ask the app to figure out whether you should go to a clinic or an ER for your kid's ailment or yourself. And he asked the question, what government data could I incorporate like U.S. News did, this list? Well, we have a list of all the federally qualified health centers in America. These are subsidized clinics that we have paid for to make access to people who can't afford it. He loaded that database into his application without any advertisement, muss, or fuss. In 1 year, he generated 100,000 referrals to federally qualified health centers because people were on their mobile phones, feeling sick, and it said, if you're ill, here's the nearest federally qualified health center that can give you lower cost access to health care. All on the phone. All on the phone. We're not even in the first inning of how this device will power the healthcare system and allow us to make better choices. Choices that will ultimately mean lower costs and better service. Third, I believe we need to increase economic growth. There is no reason that a couple of kids in Southwest Virginia can't become millionaires in less than 3 years. No reason. How many of you play Angry Birds? Are you kidding? Literally? How many of you know of Angry Birds? This is going to be a $1 billion franchise. Anyone knows who invented Angry Birds? Angry Birds was built by a couple of kids in Norway. Last I checked, Norway was not the video game developer hub of the country or the world. It is now, by the way. The government of Norway, after the fact, said, oh my God, we have all these brilliant video game developers. We should, does that mean?
Yes.
We should find a way to support these kids who want to create video games. Well, there's no reason why they couldn't have built them at Radford University. We have a video games developer lab at Radford. Right? But they need to connect. You can't build if you can't connect. So one of the ways we're going to see startups emerge is thanks to another piece of legislation worked on called crowdfunding in the Jobs Act. We will now have the ability for startups to raise money locally. I met this kid at Virginia Tech. He was a sophomore. Decided to help small business owners, restaurants, create Facebook fan pages. He charges a little bit of money, and he helps them create their fan page because he built a little tool to make it easier. He's generated millions of dollars in revenue. He went from 2 employees when I met him in August of 2011 to now he announced he'll have 50 employees by the end of this year. 50 employees in Blacksburg by the end of this year because he had a little idea on creating a better service to Main Street. And God bless him. He deserves to be a multimillionaire. And we need many, many more of him. And they will as you do your job. Finally, we can do this to address social ills. One of the most depressing statistics, I'm a father of 2 girls, and one of the most depressing statistics on violence against women is that 17, now 18 years after the passage of the Violence Against Women Act, we've seen rates of violence plummet in every age category but one: college-age women. And one of the challenges is we don't have the ability for women to communicate distress in a discreet way to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place. So I joined Vice President Biden. We put up a challenge: Acts Against Abuse. Can anybody out there in the entrepreneurial community develop something that will empower women so that they can basically get out of situations before they turn violent? And a filmmaker in New York City heard about the challenge and put out a massive email. Who knows how to build technology? Because I don't. But I've been a victim of date rape, and I know what I would like to see happen. I wish what I had was available then. So she built this service in 90 days called Circle of 6. Women preload 6 friends that they trust into the system, and with 2 clicks, they can say, "Come get me, I'm in trouble," or call 911, or reach support services. Over 50,000 women have downloaded the service on college campuses all over the country. So the point is, and this is my last slide, the point is we have the opportunity to make a big difference. But it starts with you doing your jobs and connecting people. But you can't do your jobs, and folks can't do all the things that are possible unless we can connect folks to these industries of the future. And to me, that's rethinking our educational system and finding a way to make science, technology, engineering, and math accessible for all. This is my favorite slide from when I was in the governor's office, prepared by Jim Batterson, a retired NASA engineer, who was on loan to the governor's office to identify ways we could make STEM education more accessible. Most of us think of STEM on what, if you're looking at it, is on the left-hand side of the graphic, science and math. You have to get your PhD in physics to be a STEM professional. But the reality is, STEM permeates everything, even all the way to the right. You cannot be an auto mechanic today without understanding wireless communications. You can't. There's an app store in every future car being built, right now. The same is true for modeling and simulation, the whole range of industries. So the challenge I leave you with today is to take advantage of all the new authorities, the expected funding streams, and to think big, not small. Let's invent the opportunity to open up the Saudi Arabia of spectrum so that in rural Virginia, we've maximized the value of all of this communications capacity, and that we can create the jobs and industries of the future here, and then export those products and services all the way around the world. I know we can do it. I look forward to working with you in the coming months, and God willing, if I have the chance, you may have heard I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. In the chance that I'm successful in 2013, early day one on 2014, we'll be right at it together. Thank you so very much. I suppose, for Q&A. If you're curious about what I've said, push back, tell me I'm crazy, tell me you're interested. Any reactions, questions, or concerns? Please, sir.
So, a number of years ago, the Virginia Department of Transportation had a program called Intelligent Transportation Systems, ITS.
Yes, sir.
And about 81 cell sites, towers were built on some roads you might know, Beltway, I-66, 495, etc. The carriers were sued by a couple of counties. That program is put into mothballs and is since pretty much dormant. There's a handful of co-locations go on to date. But effective 2004, I think, that program is done. I assume you'd agree that we ought to be engaging in conversation with the DOT to restart ITS and get going on building out those interstates.
Well, I mean, obviously the short answer to the question is yes, but I go back to Brian David. The reason we wrote the Community Broadband Toolkit was to empower localities to welcome these deals early so that you have a more comprehensive agreement that's repeatable. So that we don't have this hammer being forced down and create this fight between who's got power and who doesn't, when in reality, I believe in True North. True North suggests that there is a right answer. If we plan for it the right way, we could find a way to make these things make sense. And so, you know, the way I look at this is, you know, I like the framework of a region, okay? Because that may be a little bit easier to do business with a region than it is individual localities. But, you know, that's the whole premise of planning district commissions. You are a PDC, are you not, Brian? So, my theory is, it's almost like pre-positioning your assets. Let's repeat what Brian has done to inventory the assets, figure out the baseline spending, and the opportunity that if we move to 4G LTE in a thoughtful way, we can now plug in, whether it be, anyone here from Franklin? If you recall the case study of Franklin, they were able to hit, at the time, 75 or 80% of the community having access to, at that time, I think it was, might have been WiMAX, or might have been a version of it might have been WiMAX. And what they did was, they determined that a $50,000 federal grant was coming to the fire department. And rather than have them spend it only on fire department things, they essentially used those resources to buy down tower placements and equipment for the community plan. So the partner that they had for the public-private partnership sat down and said, where's the ideal location for all the towers to cover the region? And what resources, whether they be federal grants, the county government said, again memory, we're going to prepay by 5 years our phone bill, so we're going to give you a jolt of upfront cash. I think that's the right question. I mean, whether you ask me for any project, there's money coming to the Justice Department for improvements to the cops, and there's fire money from public safety, and there's such and such. My point is, all that's described in the broadband toolkit as assets we inventory and that we can use to buy down the costs of a public-private partnership. Yes, sir?
How does the FirstNet group fit into your public safety?
So FirstNet's setting the policy and the vision. But I tend to think of, regardless of who's sort of at the Uber level making judgments, rather than wait for them to sort of tell you the answer, we should be prepared to serve up the right choices for Virginia. So, again, if Tad in the South Side and Brian and others work with all of you to figure out what towers could we shut down because they're in a very expensive real estate and there's a high cost and there's a whole bunch of other things, but allows us to modernize it and introduce a new tower, perhaps on government property where the operating costs might be lower, that we sort of prepare for these kinds of things. I mean, you all have the 3D modeling, right? You all have the technology to figure out what the optimal placement is for towers in an LTE configuration. You don't need to wait for Moses to give you tablets to figure that out. You guys can do that now. Now, if you need money for this or whatever, we gotta have to chicken scratch our way through it while we wait for how all this is supposed to work. But I wouldn't wait. And we have one hook, which is governors have the right to opt out of the federal framework. So if you're doing it for no other purpose than giving information to the governor's office on the opt-out, which I think the opt-out's a bad idea, but I think it's a policy question that justifies why you're looking at this stuff now, then I would go after it. And I would try to prepare my conversations. I mean, we were at LA with the police department at the LAPD is where I held one of my forums. And the conversation was the LA government had inventory about 150 cell locations that they were looking to do for their public safety network. But they had chosen the wrong, propagation character. In other words, they were not using commercial standards. They were using the public safety presumed standards, which were old land mobile radio standards, not 4G LTE. And so they were educated. And the folks in the room that represented the tower companies and the carriers said, well, we can rationalize our footprint, share network infrastructure, and position ourselves for success if we could work together on this. And I think those conversations, there's no reason why we can't have those conversations. Yes, ma'am?
I'm very excited by what you said. I've been working since the 1990s to bridge that public and private gap. And I'd like to add to the challenge of what you're talking about to develop with the business model, a business plan for how public and private and the wireless service provider share in all of those cost and long-term benefits for all three parties. That aside from the zoning piece of this, it comes down to that bottom line, and that's always been a stumbling point that I've experienced since then. The beauty of Virginia is that there's enabling state legislation that promotes the use of wireless telecommunications master planning, and so you've got that as a tool ready for you to use to do just what you're suggesting.
But what I would suggest to you is what's missing from your formula is innovation. And what I mean by that is China Mobile partnered with Intel using Cloud RAN technologies to decost their rural wireless infrastructure, 50% OpEx, 40% CapEx, reduced cost through innovation. If I took a very expensive thing and tried to find three parties to see value add, when the underlying cost of the thing doesn't make economic sense without subsidy, then you're just sort of moving deck chairs around the table. But if you can introduce innovation that finds ways where the actual cost you're subsidizing doesn't need subsidy because they'll have, like I said, 40% of the sites might be unprofitable, maybe it's less. In rural New Hampshire, they are pursuing a pilot to do just this. It's a little crazy idea. The idea is all 4 carriers would essentially turn off their independent equipment and tower configurations in the rural parts of New Hampshire, and they'd all share in one radio access network, one base station, one tower, and use smart electronics to be able to distinguish between a call for carrier A or B or C. And they're using innovation, new technologies, new sharing boxes to accomplish that goal. I would simply suggest we need to do both. Use the enabling authority we have, but also bring in these lower cost options to make a difference. Now, some of you might hear lower cost and say, wait a minute, that's revenue out of me. And that may be true. But the question is either you do it to yourself or it'll happen outside of your purview. And that's what change is about. Others? Maybe I think we're wrapping up to the end here. Any other final questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Anisha. As a fellow Virginian, I think we're very fortunate to have such a legend come from, from our state. And we're also fortunate that somebody who could do anything. I mean, he's got a resume that's second to none, and he's chosen to give us the opportunity to have him serve us here in Virginia. It was a choice of someone who gets our issues in the Virginia Wireless Association, and no matter what he does, he will always help us move our agenda forward. So thank you, Anish, for taking time to visit us here today in Richmond. And now we're going to go on to our panel. We have just a few minutes. If you need to take a break or something along those lines, we'll be right back in just a very few minutes with an excellent panel on this issue.